The small town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone, where gossip traveled faster than the wind, and where kindness and cruelty often wore the same face depending on who you asked. At the very edge of this town, down a dusty gravel road, sat a quiet little farm. Its caretaker was Mary Collins, a gentle woman in her early 50s who had known more than her share of hardship but carried herself with quiet dignity. She worked from sunrise to sunset, tending her crops, feeding her chickens, and caring for the land her late husband left behind. Mary was not a loud woman, nor was she the kind to fight back when people poked fun at her. And in Willow Creek, there were always a few who did. Some of the town's less kind-hearted neighbors often mocked her behind her back, calling her the ragged farm widow or the lonely barn lady. But things had recently gotten worse. A group of younger men from town, spoiled sons of wealthy families who had nothing better to do, started harassing Mary openly. They would drive past her farm late at night, honking their horns, shouting cruel jokes, and sometimes even throwing trash onto her driveway. Mary never fought back. She would just lower her head, clean up the mess, and move on with her day. But deep inside, every insult was another crack in her heart. She wondered if her late husband would be ashamed of her for not standing up for herself, and she feared that her daughter, her pride and joy, would think her weak if she ever found out. Her daughter, Sarah, was away most of the time. Few people in Willow Creek knew much about her, only that she had left the small town years ago and rarely came back. The truth was something Mary never bragged about. Sarah wasn't just working out of town, she was a highly trained Delta Force operative, one of the most elite warriors the military had ever seen. Her life was filled with missions and secrets she could never share, but she called her mom whenever she could, always ending the conversation with, "You're stronger than you think, Mom. Don't let anyone make you forget that." Mary tried to believe those words, but one evening, things took a dark turn. As Mary walked back from feeding the horses, she saw headlights approach. The familiar sound of jeering voices followed. The group of young men, led by a cocky troublemaker named Jason, pulled into her driveway. They started mocking her, calling her names, laughing at the worn clothes she wore from years of farm work. Then, in a cruel escalation, Jason grabbed one of her baskets of freshly picked vegetables and threw it across the dirt, smashing the tomatoes she had worked so hard to grow. Mary froze, clutching her apron, her lips trembling. She wanted to shout, to demand they leave her property, but no words came. Jason sneered at her silence. Pathetic. No wonder everyone laughs at you. With that, the boys revved their truck engines and sped away, leaving Mary on her knees, tears staining. Mary Collins had lived on her farm for over 30 years. Every inch of the land carried memories of her late husband, Tom, the wooden barn he had built with his own hands, the apple orchard they planted together, even the creaky front porch where they had once dreamed of growing old side by side. But Tom was gone now, taken too soon by an illness Mary never spoke about. Left behind with only her animals, her crops, and the silence of the countryside, Mary did her best to keep moving forward. The townsfolk of Willow Creek often looked at her with a mixture of pity and disdain. To the kind-hearted, she was that poor widow who works too hard. To the cruel ones, she was the strange farm woman who never remarried and rarely came to town except for supplies. Mary didn't mind the whispers, at least, not at first. But what started as gossip grew into something more sinister. It began with cruel laughter at the market. A group of younger men, led by Jason Turner, the arrogant son of a wealthy rancher, mocked the way Mary dressed in her faded farm clothes. They sneered at the old pickup truck she drove, calling it scrap metal on wheels. Mary tried to ignore them, but their taunts grew bolder. Soon, they began showing up at her farm, uninvited. At first, it was petty things, tossing beer bottles into her fields, drawing crude symbols on her mailbox, shouting insults from the safety of their trucks. But one night, things went too far. They cornered Mary as she returned from feeding the animals. Jason grabbed a basket of eggs from her hands and smashed them onto the ground, laughing as yolk spilled across the dirt. His friends joined in, mocking her trembling silence. Mary's heart pounded, but fear locked her voice away. She stood frozen, her hands shaking, until the boys finally sped off, leaving her to clean the mess in the cold night air. Alone in her kitchen, she cried quietly, ashamed that she hadn't been able to stand up for herself. That same night, Sarah called. Mary tried to hide her pain, but daughters always know. Sarah pressed until her mother finally confessed through broken sobs what had been happening. On the other end of the line, Sarah's voice dropped into a calm steeliness her mother had heard only a few times before. "I'll be there tomorrow, Mom. No one hurts you and walks away from it." Few in Willow Creek knew what Sarah had become. She had left town at 18, driven by a fire to prove herself. Years later, she wasn't just serving her country, she was part of Delta Force, one of the most elite military units in the world. She had endured grueling training, survived hostile missions, and stood unflinching in the face of danger most people couldn't imagine. But nothing cut deeper than hearing her own mother had been humiliated in her own home. The next evening, Sarah drove down the gravel road and parked in front of the farmhouse. Mary, who had aged years in just a few months of torment, broke into tears at the sight of her Tao.